Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our first of our three-part webinar series in Athletics Diversity and Inclusion Designee, the ADID, and Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. My name is Angel Mason, and I'm the Director of Athletics at Berry College. Today's session, part one, will cover the context of DEI within collegiate athletics and higher education, and provide a baseline for success for ADIDs newly appointed in the role. I'm pleased to introduce our two speakers for today, Dr. Akilah R. Carter-Francique and Dr. Albert Bimper Jr. Dr. Carter-Francique is the Executive Director for the Institute for Study of Sport, Society, and Social Change at San Jose State University. She is also an associate professor at SJSU in the Department of African American Studies. Her scholarly endeavors and field of focus encompasses the intersection of sport, society, and social justice that is inclusive of issues of diversity, social movements, and the dynamics of social change and development. Carter-Francique serves as the 2018-19 president of the North American Society for Sociology of Sport, currently serves as a member of the Laureus Sport for Good Research Council in the US, and she is the co-editor of the Athletic Experience at Historically Black Colleges and Universities, Past, Present, and Persistence, and Critical Race Theory, Black Athletic Experiences in the United States. Welcome, Dr. Akilah R. Carter-Francique.
Hello, thank you.
Our second presenter is Dr. Albert Bimper Jr., presently serves as the Assistant Vice President of Senior Associate Athletic Director with oversight of the Student Athlete Support Services and all diversity and inclusion efforts within the athletic department at Colorado State. He also holds the rank of associate professor with appointments in both sports management and African American studies in the College of Liberal Arts. Additionally, Dr. Bimper serves as the founding director of the sports management program at Colorado State University. The CSU Athletics Department is home to nearly 400 student athletes across 16 varsity sports. He has been published in numerous academic journals spanning the topic areas of intercollegiate athletics, education, cultural studies, and the sociology of sport. He most recently published in his self-authored book titled Black Collegiate Athletes and the Neoliberal State, Dreaming from Bended Knee. Welcome, Dr. Albert Bimper Jr.
Pleasure to be with you all.
Well, before we jump in, I'm going to ask that everybody who is in attendance creates the poll that is listed in order to give us a baseline for who we have in the room with us. So if you are a full-time person in DEI, or if you have just been recently appointed with the ADID designation, as well as the number of administrators, not including coaches, in your department that are of color, and then finally, your affiliation, NAIA, junior college, NCAA, Division I, II, or III. And if you are so willing, you can also feel free to adjust your name within Zoom to indicate, as you will see with all of ours, your affiliation. I'm going to partake as well. Now, as you all are doing that, I also wanted to share that we will save a few minutes at the end for any burning questions, but you can make sure to submit those questions throughout the actual webinar in the chat below. I'll be keeping an eye on those and making sure to pull a few when we get to the end with the time that we have left for you all. I'm going to give people one more second to complete that. Awesome. Okay, so who we have in the room right now is 89% are people who have just been provided the ADID designation. So that is the vast majority of our group, and I think that's going to be great here. We have an average, highest percentage is 2 administrators of color at 28%, and 1 administrator of color at 20%. So those are our highest numbers there. And then the vast majority, 77%, are Division I individuals that are within the meeting. So thank you guys for completing that. That definitely helps our presenters be able to know who is actually in the room. So without further ado, we are going to jump right in so that you get to spend some time with these experts in the work that they do. So we're going to I just want to open it up to the both of you. You've been doing work in this field of DEI for some time now. And how did we move into this ADID designation? How did we get to this point, if you could share with us?
Keela, I'll let
You
you
want to
add
go
on.
ahead? You go ahead. Okay. All right. You know, I think it's very interesting. And so being the kind of person I am, I create presentations, y'all. So just bear with me. So I put together just a small informational PowerPoint to try to understand kind of how this came to be. And even doing this effort, you know, taught me a few things as well. But as I looked it up again, the NCAA, you know, really worked with the, in particular, the Minority Opportunities and Interest Committee. And from that, conversations over the past 2 years, I think, you know, conversations started around 2018 about creating this position, creating this space. And then we see in these images here that over the past 2 years been working towards creating this designee, getting it signed off on by the membership, and to reach every level of D1, D2, D3. So conversations came into play again a couple of years ago, because I think many may, you know, automatically assume, as we've seen in sports throughout these past 10 months, what I would say is sort of these reactive positions being created for diversity, equity, and inclusion in various organizations, higher ed, and in, again, sport as well. More specifically, when we talk about the ADID, is one of the things that was sort of teased out that I thought was quite interesting was that the committee proposed that the designation work to, again, establish and maintain environments throughout the NCAA as it relates to that cultural diversity and gender equity. And I think, you know, Albert and I will probably tease these out with regards to race, gender, LGBTQ, other aspects of diversity in the conversation today. But also I wanted to sort of correspond and say this was highlighted that it was linked to the presidential pledge and the commitment by presidents to sign off and say, we are on board with promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion as a part of our day-to-day action that we have. And so I encourage you to even sign on or look into the link for the presidential pledge. In that particular webpage, on that particular webpage, it actually goes in and you can see how many presidents from D1, D2, D3 have actually signed on to that pledge as well. So just to give you a little window into the significance of DEI work, the position, and the support from each of those levels, I think that's something to take into consideration as you do your day-to-day job. So what is the ADID? And I just pulled this again from the 2020 report because it was put into place and voted on at the 2020 NCAA convention. And question number 1, you know, what is the definition of the ADID? And it says here, appointed by university leadership in areas of DEI efforts within athletic departments. Who can be designated? Any staff member of the institution or conference that is appointed university leadership. I'm gonna read that again. Any staff member of the institution or conference office that is appointed. Does this proposition, again, require athletic diversity and inclusion designee to be a newly hired person? And it says no. It says it recommends that it be, that it not be an institution director of athletics, though. Okay. And then finally, excuse me here, will institutions be required to report to the NCAA the name of the individual appointed? And it says yes. So that just gives us a general background and overview to be able to sort of unpack during this discussion today, who this person is, the significance of this individual, and what powers they may have in their day-to-day coordination. So I'll stop share there.
Yeah, and if I might add, I want to begin with this. Thank you for the invitation to Moaa to be a part of this conversation, and happy to be with the family of Moaa. So good to see
Yes.
some familiar faces on here. I want to say that, like, for myself, I've been in this role for about 7 years now at Colorado State, and so Angel, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but I think it's important, and it was important for me jumping into the role that I remember and acknowledge that there's the institutional start, right, where the institution recognizes a moment, and then there's been a lot of folks before myself doing the work. And so I've sometimes gotten the designation of like, oh, the first in this particular leadership role. But I've also been schooled by the old school that there's some folks that have been doing this work in different ways for many years at their respective institutions. So there's been a struggle and a fight for this position and its position in terms of inside the structure, right? So just want to kind of start there. But for us at Colorado State, we started on a reactive type of moment, like many of you on the call, either reactive to the moments that are happening in our society, or reactive to an incident on your campus, reactive to one school. It's called the arms race at DEI. They're like, one school's doing it, so we got to do it. So we got to do it. All those things are a reality for us. And so I don't want to, talk necessarily bad about the folks that have stepped into the role, but you got to have a kind of an honest conversation around what is being asked of you, what you're prepared for, and maybe what you're up against a little bit. So that's kind of just a starting point for myself. I started in the role as a result of some of our alums, and particularly some of our Black alums that had not come back to the campus for such a long time. And I happened to be in Kansas at the time, and I was like, well, I'm a little closer to Colorado. I'm gonna drive over there and see what they got going on in Colorado State. And so, I drove over. It's the first time I'd come back as an alum of my own institution. And the question that started my role was simply this: what are you doing for Black athletes in the department? And and I've shared this with many before. Our athletic director at the time and our head football coach at the time didn't have the right answer. Right? And their answer wasn't, some may say it was terrible or not. I just think it was uninformed. And they say, what do you mean? Why would we have any different experience? And that set it off, right? It set it off for the alum because there was a gap in their understanding and acknowledgement of different experiences on our campuses. And for us at Colorado State, a historically white institution. So, that kind of set the momentum for us. And so there wasn't necessarily a worse incident than that, but it was important, and it was important to the university leadership that then all of a sudden I found myself in conversation of a role. So not to dominate the time, but I think there's the institutional start, and then there's the work that people have been doing. All that needs to be acknowledged. And, I welcome you all to the new profession.
Well, Dr. Bimper, that's a great segue, right? So we have some context for the work that has been done, that has been pushed forward for us to get to the ADID designation. But as we do that, how do we then work even on our campuses, within our conference offices? How do we begin to do this work of setting those priorities that you made reference to, or getting people to really understand, the right or wrong answer? Maybe we're not saying there's one of the two, but we know that there's something that doesn't actually lead to supporting all of the students. So how do we begin to have conversation or set priorities on our campuses or in our conference offices?
I guess I would respond in this way. And Dr. Carter and Francine and I have had this conversation. And I'm speaking to those on the call that have now taken on this role. I hope that you have already had, or you soon plan to have a conversation with those that appointed you to this role. And that conversation in many respects needs to look like, what am I asked to do? I think you'll find that Akila and I have some different um, kind of understandings of what our roles are at our institutions. And for me, what I'm getting at is, some have been asked to take on this role because you have been identified as someone with a lot of passions around DEI. Maybe you have an ability to articulate your experience to others. All that is great and charismatic. You're a good speaker, and that then kind of has then positioned you to a point of being a trainer for your department. And I think that is a very different position than those that are being asked to lead strategically for their department. That's no disrespect, but like, what have you been asked to do? Because then your priority list, your assessment, your evaluation of what you've been asked to do will be dependent on that type of responsibility. For myself, and I very clearly to my department said, I can't be the one, and I don't think it is appropriate. I don't think it's strategic enough for us. It won't be sustainable if I'm the one training every sport, every coach, every team. That just it's a good role, and it's not my skill set. So right, you're kind of honest with what your skill set is. And then there's the strategic, like, how do we build this as a part of our internal structure? It just like the sales and marketing unit, just like fundraising, just like the any other group, this needs a unit too. That was my fault when I first kind of came to Colorado State. I came by myself. Some of you have been appointed by yourselves. You've got to build a unit. You can't be all things to everybody at all times. And so unless, right, you're being asked to be the trainer, and that means facilitate conversations, facilitate programming. All those things are important. I look at it as there's that opportunity, and in many respects, I don't mean to lessen or diminish the role, right? You're building kind of this inventory list. That's not a check the box list. I wouldn't jump to that conclusion, but there's an inventory list of what we are accomplished based on programming and training. And then there's the kind of the strategic efforts, the management, the leadership side of this, where you are thinking about multiple things at one time. You're thinking about budgets. You're thinking about simultaneous programs happening for the group. You're thinking about long-term, short-term, long-term goals, and where diversity inclusion filter throughout the various units. When you can't be there, that work still got to be getting done. So I think those are the questions to be asked of what have I been asked to do? Or if I've then self-appointed myself, how am I strategically going to accomplish this?
And I think to Albert's point is, we do come from different vantages. I'm not in the athletic department at all. I'm running a sport institute. I'm building a sport institute, and being in this role in particular, I'm also new to SJSU. I'm new to the university, so I come by way of scholar, by writing and researching on this subject matter. I was a former student athlete, just like Albert, competing at the University of Houston, and then my passion sort of led me into this space to take on this role academically. But with my work, much like his, writing on the lived experiences of not only what I call me search myself, but of those young people that are navigating these spaces, in particular, Black female collegiate athletes, as Angel knows, in this space. And so it was very interesting how I sort of kind of step into these spaces as a faculty member at one of my first institutions at Texas A&M University. Immediately called upon by the athletic department, we need some help, can you help mentor? And that's often a call or an ask of a faculty member, a Black faculty member in particular, to help recruit, not necessarily to retain, but we'll go into that conversation another day. And so I was able to create an avenue where I did provide some mentorship, but I did it in a group setting with a program called Sister to Sister, and was able to build some collective dialogue in that space. I did later navigated to Prairie View A&M University, Okay. And that was just amazing, amazing experience, and didn't do so much programmatically within that space, but was able to serve on the athletic council, and be able to sort of have a seat at the table to speak to some issues as it pertains to student athlete experiences. Now that I'm at SJSU and being in this role as executive director of a sport institute focusing on social change, I'm also called upon to help counsel not only student athletes, but also the coaches, the staff members in challenges that they may be having or facing, and creating programming. And not only that, but to also help facilitate conversations or create opportunities for student athletes to be a mentor. And so through the Institute, I even created an internship program. So I have a couple student athletes that are very involved in social justice and activism that are working with me currently, and doing some great things there. And so, I'd say I agree totally with what Albert is saying with regards to sort of setting up that plan. I'm going to adopt the words of Killer Mike. You got to plot, plan, strategize, organize, and mobilize with what you do. Okay. And in a way, maybe a softer way to say it, right, is to think about it from a perspective of self-reflection, of evaluation, of analysis, of planning, and the ability to take action. Okay. So when we talk about that notion of self-reflection, I would say first and foremost, once you understand and learn from the administration what you've been tasked to do, you need to do a self-check and say, am I equipped to do some of these things? Do I have the skill sets to deliver these programmings? Or are there some areas that I could improve upon, gain knowledge on in order to fulfill these responsibilities that are asked of me? And have a very honest conversation. We're in a space of higher education. We're in a space where learning and resources are available to you. The second thing I would say is gather information, again, on the department and also on the broader university, to really analyze DEI challenges for student athletes in particular, but even students on that whole campus. So you're going to have to connect with some folks in the DEI office to find out what's going on there, and other areas like student affairs, like academic affairs, to find out what some of those challenges are from their perspective for the student athletes in your space. And then I would say to develop a vision, mission, and goals and objectives for you in your role. To Albert's point of creating a team, creating a committee that you can work with, you got to create a strategic plan with, the athletic director, the other administrators, the coaches, as well as university personnel within and throughout. So when I think about student affairs, I think about the LGBTQ offices. I think about the cultural centers. I think about your counseling and psychological services. Mental health and wellness is a real thing, particularly now with what's going on in our climate. Also connecting with academic affairs and those faculty members, and Black faculty members in particular, so they can, again, be of support and be of service. And then also, as I said, speak with the university DEI offices to find out what things are going on there, what communications you can have, and to open up in that space. After all of that, I would say, after self-evaluation, again, identify what trainings, educations, and persons can provide education for you and support for you. Understand there may be a cost to that training. Again, have that one to come back to that AD and have that conversation. I'm gonna need some budget line to help support my knowledge and my growth and development of programming. Also identify what information that you'll have access to. Do you have access to the demographics? Do you have access to the information that you'll need to conduct an accurate assessment of the department to understand where we are as it pertains to diversity issues, as it pertains to issues of equity? Okay. And then finally, again, as I said, in developing that committee, identify those key personnel to assist you in the receipt of and dissemination of information, as it says in that ADID designation, dissemination of that information, as well as program development and assistance.
I'll give the snaps if we're not going to have give the snaps because we can't see anybody. So let me just give the snaps out. As you make reference to working across campus, partnering with these other individuals, creating these, relationships, how do we have people that are just now really getting into this work in a professional place as far as the ADID designation, with trying to build a shared language that's specific to the work that's being done within athletics in correlation with how the campus, the college, the university, the conference office is working collaboratively together?
So the question is how to build a shared language with our campus partners.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I I go back to that part of kind of the self-reflection, just, and I just want to belabor the point a little bit that because we have a lot of, new folks in this arena, per se, that, use kind of the academic language around what is your epistemological kind of stance, right? So for those that are doing the PhD work, right, it's what's your kind of theory of knowledge, I think, is what you're asking. And you've got to, and in that theory of knowledge, you are building a language base. I have seen, what I hope is that we fight some battles, maybe I'm speaking to myself here, is that we fight some battles with our campus of the value and the role of athletics at our institutions. And so you don't want to go unequipped without the language. But you've got to be, you've got to be ready for folks to challenge you because it's so new and people are questioning I think either the reality or the agenda here for DEI in this space. And so folks may see themselves as experts, and you're not trying to have that battle, but you are trying to say, on my institution, what's the temperament? What's the tenor? What's what is the language that my campus uses? Some of our campuses may be, right, let's call it what it is, a little bit more left leaning than others. And some of us, some of our campuses aren't. That's where you internally have got to find that unique language on your campus and understand what you are up against or what you have an ally with. So that's to some degree. The language is what programs are already existing. I think Dr. Carter talked about that. Like, that's the language. You see where the emphasis may reside on your campus when you see what other offices are doing. The language is if your institution has a multicultural center versus a disaggregated kind of cultural support centers, such as we have at Colorado State, you get an idea of where the language is. Where it is the idea that kind of all groups have a hub in this one space on campus, and that's where resources are disseminated from, or does everyone have their own kind of starting point as a center? You're starting to kind of see, I think, out of that sense, the structural language. You've got to engage faculty, you've got to engage, this side of campus where faculty in terms of the language of, let me just pull it down from 30,000 foot view. The work we're trying to do with our student athletes is to create opportunities, to create engagement, create experiences, to create connections. Some of our faculty may not see or may still operate some stereotypes with our various populations. You've got to understand the language of those faculty. Again, that's what you're trying to work with. If you're strategically trying to create an experience and an environment, it includes understanding faculty's language. If you like it or not right now, that's what you're working with. Does that help you, Angel? Angel, that's a little high, but.
No, I think that that's great. We need to be able to continue to kind of push ourselves to work across campus in a way that kind of serves the population that we're trying to serve, right? I think we're all here because we love to serve the student and we want to continue to do so. And that actually leads us right in to our next step here. How do we do this and where are we going with this, right? Where are we going? How do we get to this place of meeting the expectations of the very loud student voice right now, right? How does this ADID designation, those that have been doing the DEI work, how do we put ourselves in a position moving forward to be able to meet the expectations, written or not, that are coming out of the service to our students?
I'll just say, for me, students are first. I've always been a student first type of faculty member, administrator. But in order, as I think about my role, even, and every time I step into a new space, my first thing I do is begin to sort of commune and converse with university leadership and simply begin to do my own work of, well, what is the university mission? Okay, well, what is the mission of the athletic department? What's written down, right? What are the missions of these other departments when we talk about student affairs and academic affairs? And then how do I want to sort of navigate myself in this space from this office to be able to address all that, understanding the language, as Albert said, but also begin to create programming that will begin to support these young people. Another, I think, key part of it, in addition to sort of understanding a mission and identifying that for yourself, is get help. He talked about, Albert talked about, creating your team, getting a committee together, but there's a need for outside support. There's a need for experts. And to be, quite frank, there are faculty and staff that are at your respective universities that have probably written on some of this, that are teaching classes on this subject matter, bend their ear, or provide a space and come together to sit at a table, or Zoom at this point, right? To have conversations about what is going on, and what you've been tasked to do and what you would like to provide. And it's an opportunity to step outside of that athletic bubble that I've been a part of, I've seen from many angles, and to really begin to create a community for those students. I write a lot on this notion of, student athlete identity. So does Albert, with respect to, cultivating sort of a culturally relevant education and creating an atmosphere of a sense of belonging, which is really sort of spearheaded in this language when we talk about inclusive excellence. And again, I've written on that, so I'm happy to sort of share that piece with you all as it pertains to Black female athletes and including them into the conversation. But it requires an opportunity to sort of grab hold of what's in your space, utilizing the experts there to support you in your mission, but also support those young people as they develop from year to year. And use them as well to help assist in the education of those administrators, of those staff and those coaches, because to Albert's point, you being on the inside, if you are, may create some additional challenges coming from that voice coming from you. So you may need that once you understand your culture, right? You may need that outside perspective, that expert coming from someone outside that can be objective, if you will, to be able to communicate, some of the issues, some of the challenges, and how we can work together to best support our young athletes as they come through that process.
Angel, I don't know if I'm going to track us back to your question around language, and you might have to reiterate the question of kind of where we go from now. But I think the words that Dr. Carter Francique is saying, that this is the language, sense of belonging. What you're going to have to do in this role is to question not only the language of campus, but you're going to have to question that existing language in athletics, its reality in athletics for your population, for your student athletes and your staff. And your coaches. What does a sense of belonging now mean? And if we are to have an honest conversation about that, what could it mean, right? What is identity and why does it matter in our spaces? I think that becomes I'll go back to that theory of knowledge. What you understand and think about identity will then guide your efforts in the programming and why you do the programming. How do you, if you value and believe in the kind of the language of community, we can have a really great conversation around what community means to various communities. And this is kind of it extends to our efforts around recruiting. It extends to our efforts around fundraising. It extends to our efforts around creating a fan engagement, stakeholder groups that we want to engage. That language around community now needs to be interrogated to some degree. So I think those are the strategies. Is again, you go back to what is your role? What have you been asked to do? Is that appropriate? And then where in the department can you then kind of interrogate the language? Build a team that can help facilitate the conversation. I think it's probably not the best of our interests, although I get the sense of urgency that, and no disrespect to you and to Angel, is the idea. ADs want something, they want results right now. I get that. They want a program yesterday to say, on their conference calls, this is what we're doing at their institution. They want to hang their hat on that. I get that. But that's not always sustainable if you approach it the wrong way. So these things the language matters to how it guides your programming. If you, as you do that, programming needs to build off, from one program to the next, essentially, right? To have a kind of disjointed approach to this work is not beneficial to anyone. So I think that is, the things that you're working towards. It doesn't have to be slow, because but you can't eat the elephant all at one time either. And people have to respect a process if we're to do this right.
Yeah, and just to reaffirm, in that foundation, that framework that Albert spoke of, think about in your programming, in your creation, what is that framework you're working from? Because you're always going to go back to it and you have that to sort of set on. So whether it's critical race theory, if we're talking about that, if it's this notion of culturally relevant pedagogy, and the work of Gloria Ladson Billings, those are some of those individuals, those educators, those programmatic language that you can steep what you do in there, and knowing that it's always going to, if you follow that particular foundation and those tenets, if you will, you're going to meet the goals and objectives that you have created, because everything will be connected. The last thing I'll say in this component of supporting the student athlete, and we've mentioned a lot about faculty and staff and administrators and getting them to be on your committees and on your teams and whatnot. But let's not forget about the student. Some part of what you do is going to have that student voice in there. We also need to understand from them, what have your lived experiences been? What have your expectations been? Many of them that I've communicated with, even over the past few months, and even over the past few years, some are really hurting, because of how they've been treated in these spaces. They love the sport, don't get me wrong, but the overall holistic experience that they perhaps came to get, or can see that it's possible to get from this environment, they are not having. So, provide a space for the student voice to come in there, to help give you some insight as you create programs, services, and deliver those, efforts that are required from that position.
I'd echo the role of our student voices. As an example, or several examples of what we've done in Colorado State over time, is as we built programs, right? It's been an important kind of element to our work, is that to include student voices, and to also recognize that when I took over the role, some of you this may resonate, is that our SAC leadership didn't look like the entire department, and so and it wasn't that I needed to force student athletes of color or various identities onto SAC leadership, right? It was then to question, well, what is it that is preventing them? Why are they not choosing this this space? Where can we create other leadership opportunities for them, where they are engaged in something that is meaningful to their experience? And so, we've positioned a group that's focused on our student athletes of color. We have any conversation we can have from this group of student athletes of color. The goal is that it centers, though, race and ethnicity and that experience. Out of that, though, is not just the program, but now we also have student leadership that helps to guide some of the curriculum in that program. They're engaged in a different way. You start to identify, and other leadership starts to emerge. We've done that with programs that we focus on women's experience. And so that will be a program we call Rambition. That's just for our student athletes, female student athletes. Any conversation can happen there, but we begin and center the conversation from the experiences of women. And then once you kind of build the leadership structures per se, The goal was then not to do it initially, but to, kind of build some buy-in. Now we've built into our SAC a director of inclusion represented by our student athletes. We've built in kind of directors of program. You've built into their agenda items in terms of that leadership group that the NCAA has, or our departments have. You've built in new voices. And so we can constantly go to these voices. They become a pulse for your leadership. Again, that's building the team. The team doesn't only have to be staff, to Akila's point. The team can absolutely be your student athletes.
Oh my gosh, you guys are giving us so many great nuggets here. I know that I want to make sure that I keep an eye on time for the questions that folks may have. But I'm going to ask a final question here, since we saw that the majority of our attendees are recent ADID designees. What piece of advice would you give them as they begin to not just move into this work or be given this designation, but also as they do so during a time where this topic matter has become very focused from our national climate, as well as on many of our campuses, the climate of the students that are asking for this work to be done? What advice would you guys give?
Go ahead and start. I would say, you are not alone. And I'm gonna screen share one last time here, in saying that, and that it is a national conversation. I've been a great, thing I think that's been about this position that I've had over the past few months. Hold on real quick. Over the past few months is that, you are not alone. And it's been a national conversation. It's been an international conversation. I've been on platforms and talking with folks about how they have been affected in the UK, in Australia, in Taiwan, with the Black Lives Matter movement. And so with that, I say, there's resources available for you. It's not something that you have to sort of go alone and figure it out. And so looking at some of those resources, they come from the governmental standpoint, local and regional government alliance on race and equity. There's a tools and resource and a toolkit embedded within their particular website. If we look from a higher ed perspective, University of Michigan, and there's other institutes out there as well, I'm just teasing them out as one example, has a race equity toolkit. And then race equity tools. This is one that I have here. It's sort of imaged on this screen that talks about this notion of, fundamentals. What do we need to understand from a racial standpoint? Plan, act, evaluate, et cetera, and a glossary of terms to help you understand the language and dialogue that you may be getting into and having conversations as you talk with those in student affairs, if you talk to those that are faculty, so that you can be on one accord in your communication. And also to know that, when we talk about this work, it's not, yes, we're in a racialized moment now, but when we think of diversity too, there is the race aspect, gender, sexual orientation, religion, ethnicity. We have international students that we also need to sort of consider in that conversation, because their own livelihood, if you will, at the university was in jeopardy at the onset of COVID, as we know, right? Will they be able to stay in this country and compete because of these designations? And so to continue to grow in this, there's opportunities there, whether it be continuing education certificates. And again, I've just listed a few universities on this screen here that offer such certification, as well as, again, some of us in the audience today going back to school, graduate certifications, graduate degrees that you can get. There's trainings that are also available. Again, separate from Albert, he said, I don't train people. I understand, it's a lot of work, but it's a lot of work to be on the inside. And so with the Institute, we, speak to and train as it pertains to diversity, equity, inclusion, but look to it from a sport perspective, because there's nuances within sport that are separate from just DEI when we talk about it in the greater society. And then I'm just going to send a shout out to Google. There are books, articles, webinars, you type in DEI in sport, you're going to find something out there that you can learn from. there's trainings that are available to you. So I just want you to understand you're not alone in this space. You know, we're available for communication. I'm putting you out there, Albert. But to know that build networks within yourselves, but find these other spaces and places to continue to grow, learn, so that you can be the best that you can be in that space and provide the support that you want to provide in your role.
And I'll be short with my kind of final comments, but I want to add to the resources. Kind of a shout out to the DICE group that's been led by Sheridan Blanford and Dewan Baker and many others. So sorry if I don't name you specifically, but you know, there have been some administrators that have had these roles, acquired these roles over time the last few years, and they've had an effort that's been ongoing to organize. So I hope that you might reach out to some of those individuals as well as a resource. You know, lastly, I would say that you know, old professor of mine here at Colorado State, who was the one that helped me get through the school, because my transcript didn't point towards doctor as an undergrad. But you know, so he told me, when you take on this role, he said it's not so much about what gets you in the door, but how you build value. You know, to kind of to stay there and make it sustainable. And so, you know, I would say that something I've learned that all of you could be thinking about is you've got to build some data for yourself. This is going to be important. That data is going to have to look, just kind of writing through some things. You've got some programmatic data. You've got academic data. You've got to kind of look into the details of the services academically. We've got to question GPAs. We got to question term GPAs. We got to question opportunities that are co-curricular. We've got to think about, you know, probation rate, all these all these things matter to a diversity conversation. I think about how you are having ongoing conversations. So there's this data around impact. You've got to build that data, and you've got to build that resource to articulate the efforts that are happening. I talked about exposure data. So, you know, it's the qualitative type of things that say this is what this is providing to a population, that when we look at this holistically, when we look at this historically, you know, exposure to different opportunities, exposure to different conversations is what matters to them being on our particular campuses. So how you are able to kind of think about that. And engagement data, like who are those that you're engaging? You build value in the same way that I keep bringing up these other units like fundraisers, and they have engagement data. We've got to have engagement data as you know, as the ADIDs. We've got to have ways that our student athletes, we're showing their levels of engagement. To a point, last point is like, even so small as the conversation we're talking through our programming is, we're trying to build some a few more mentoring programs. And I asked my staff, well, what's the value of this? And they quickly have kind of been trained to think the idea is like, oh, doc, well, the value is we have data on how many letters of recommendation we're going to get from our student population over a course of a year. And I can talk about to a dean that I was like, man, my staff is there. It seems small, but that's the type of data to articulate our value and the exposure and so forth. So just want to build data for yourself.
And I want to add just one more point to that. As much as you are building data, as much as you are doing this work, I also want to again kind of speak to the value of networks, to the value of a support system. There's an emotional labor that you will endure in this role. You've got to find a way to take care of self in this, because you'll be facing some things, having some conversation with individuals, and you're gonna have a day, you're gonna have a moment where shutting the door is not enough, okay? So I just wanna sort of put that out there to say that there's gotta be a space, and again, a network where you can come and communicate and have that sort of validation and that understanding of just breathe. So find that support system, build that network. I know Moaa is probably gonna, again, provide a hub for that for you, but you may need something immediate to unwind each day, each week, as you move through your role.
Thank you both for that. I want to open it up now because our time has flown by, for anybody that has any questions for either of our presenters. you can type it right into the chat that's at the bottom of your page. And while we're waiting to see if we have any questions pop up from anybody, you can also feel free to turn on your camera. And if you don't want to type it in the chat, you can unmute yourself and be able to ask your question directly. And while we're giving people a moment to figure that out for anyone who is not a tech guru, one of the things that, oh, wait, before I ask that, I have a hand raised. Ruben from UMass something, I can't see the whole title.
UMass Lowell.
UMass?
Yes, UMass Lowell in Massachusetts. My question is, and thank you so much for all your information on this and being able to provide this workshop for us to take part in. I found it extremely helpful as I take on this role. My question is, during the pandemic, you know, a lot of universities have been pretty stretched out as far as some of their budgets go, and also during this time, I think we've seen that we need to do a lot of work with our diversity, equity, and inclusion programs on campus. What are some of your recommendations that during a time when budgets are low, you know, we are being sort of like, you know, some of the staff have been, you know, laid off or you know, lost their jobs. How do you find it for us to be able to bring all resources together? And with the ADIDs role being added onto a lot of our current roles, how do you find it that we can still kind of bring all resources together to be able to provide the programming that we need, as we talked about here, you know, having a complete program with budgets, with strategic planning, when you actually have less resources available for you?
Maybe I'll take a crack at that, and I won't bury the lead. I don't have a great answer to COVID. We've been trying to think through that too. Something that I've found is, and what I sense possibly, so I could be very wrong in the question, is I'm looking at long-term, big vision. What do I need to have in place? And I think the point of the conversation a little bit is to kind of step back, and you can't deliver all right now. So finding new ways to engage that may not be programming, but then also suggest, again, that strategic process. So you can start at this moment, be building out. I think my student athletes are a bit zoomed out, right? And so as much as they've said, hey, we want to have these discussions, I can put a program together and they either are not showing up unless I make it mandatory, or they're not showing up in masses the same way. And I don't hold that against them. So I think there's an opportunity right now to over communicate process. And so, hey, in my new role, I'm thinking about this as a process. Who would like to join in these conversations? And then you start to have smaller, maybe on your part, a few more meetings, unfortunately, but you're putting out, here's our process, working towards to a place where we might be in person, or we might kind of be able to launch the program that makes sense. And then communicating along that way to your constituent group, hey, this is what we've recently talked about. So you're trying to do some over communication around process, where you are compensating a little bit around program that kind of just is not working in this environment. So I don't know if that's helpful. In that process, we can start to have conversations around budget. We can have conversations around team building, like leadership groups. I think that gives folks a little bit more sense of like, all right, there's work being done here, and not only having to wait for the program.
Thank you. One of the things that I found is with our student athletes, they, you know, they're talking about it on social media, and they want to find out what's actually happening from our perspective. What are we doing? They constantly want to know. So one of the things that we've been doing is being able to kind of share the message through our SAC representatives and through our head coaches meeting, where we're keeping them informed of what we're doing to be able to, you know, to provide the information that they need and provide the resources that they need. So one of the things that we've done is we've actually brought in some outside experts to be able to have these conversations with us, with a student group, and also with the coaches and staff group. And then on the side, while that's going on, we've also put together a subcommittee that includes people from outside the department and from inside the department to put together some strategic planning for the future. But that's kind of what we've been doing now. But I find it that moving forward, we're definitely going to need more resources. Budgets, programming, being able to to evaluate what we're doing, being able to process data, so we can have a better long-term vision and long-term planning for success.
I think you're on the right path. It doesn't feel comfortable, right, to kind of go slow, but slow is smooth and smooth is fast.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just agree. You're on the right path. I think to me, I'm like, take advantage of this time. You have the opportunity to do that reflective work. You have the opportunity to communicate with folks across campus, because everybody's in sort of this reprogramming, if you will, state because of the racial climate. So it's an opportunity to get on committees, get on affiliate boards, get on different sections and meet with different groups and in the higher ed community, such that you can gain some insight to do your job and know who those playmakers are, if you will, to also perhaps even provide support in programming or collaborative efforts to provide programming that your athletes could be a part of with the greater student body.
So we probably have time for one more question. Mal Stuman.
Yeah, Mal Stuman.
Mal, thank you.
Yeah. I just had a question. I know you flashed some resources up on the screen a few different times. One of the things I'm just trying to figure out, having newly been appointed as of March 1st, in addition to doing academic success, so it's kind of like, a whole nother piece, but I'm the only Black person in our department, and as you might have guessed. And so what I'm really trying to do is discover resources for those beginning steps, like assessment and tools that we can use to see where we're at. And we do have some connection with our Diversity Equity Center, and we have a DEI professional who's at the highest level. So I know there's some resources there, but are there things that you have identified already to do those assessments with a focus on athletics to get some of those baselines, focus groups, or any tools that you've identified already? And if so, where are they?
Well, what I have put together, because through the Institute, we have our own webinars. We had a conference that we kind of did a words to action workshop where people can kind of work through these steps on their own and do some sort of problem solving, whether it be race and gender, whether it be the athletic identity, or whether it be diversity, equity, inclusion. But there are a number of organizations out there that are working on things specific to sport, that Albert has mentioned a couple of those as well, but even outside of sport. So from a racial standpoint, there's an organization called Beloved Community. And I'll provide these in a resource to the Moaa administration so they can deliver that as well. But they have an audit that they can come in and do and be able to sort of assess your organization. There's individuals or organizations like the Race Equity Institute that can actually come in and do some training with your staff. From a gendered perspective, you got the Women's Sports Foundation, the Black Women's Sports Foundation, the Tucker Center for Girls and Women in Sport that does some interactive engagement. From an LGBTQ perspective, Athlete Ally. From disability, I've got a great colleague, Eli Wolf, that does a lot, Mary Holmes, that does a lot as it pertains to disability services, particularly when we think about learning disabilities in this moment, right? Who has access to that? There's mental health and wellness from a national organization, NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness, but they're local, so you can find them in your region that can provide resources. Again, on campus as well, you have those counseling services, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Organization, the Alliance for Social Workers in Sport. So there's organizations that are out there that are doing this work that we can definitely sort of communicate and provide those websites for you to be able to identify some sort of best practices as you continue to move forward based on what you have evaluated, based on the data that you have obtained, to Albert's point of gathering that information so you can move forward in your planning.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. We want to give a huge Moaa thank you to Dr. Carter Francique and Dr. Bimper for spending this time with us. It has been invaluable. This has been recorded and will be shared, as well as some of the tools for you all to be able to have will be shared later on. We want to make sure that everyone keeps an eye out for the second webinar in our 3-part series that will be taking place in April, as well as future resources to connect our members that are serving as ADIDs and those with longstanding experience in the areas of DEI. Okay, so just keep an eye out for those, check your emails. And again, thank you all for attending the webinar, and a special Moaa snap to our panelists. We so appreciate you. You all have a wonderful day and be safe.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.